we came across former US military combat man John Vasquez, who describes how an entire battalion of some 1,300 men were abducted in September 1977.
And this is when the captain, our captain of Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Infantry, was walking out from this building to make a speech. And this speech was to advise us of our 6 to 8 weeks training course. And just when he was walking up to this dais or podium to make this speech, I heard this rushing noise.
A rushing noise?
A rushing noise. And I leaned back and I looked across to my left, and I saw this bright light, intense bright light. I thought it was a Jeep or a truck or something, and it was moving across slowly. And I saw some of Charlie Company's men running out of their formation. Others were standing still. And I wanted to take a better look at this, so I leaned forward. And when I leaned forward, this bright light just got really close, and it was in between the tree lines, or between the tree lines, and I still thought it was a truck, but the light was really, really intense. I mean, it's white, bright light. And I don't know what happened here, but I went unconscious for a few minutes. And when I came to, I was looking downwards and I couldn't move. I couldn't move my feet. And I tried desperately to move from where I was standing. The next thing I did was I could move my upper body, so I turned to my right, and I saw some of the men running to the tree lines, and others were diving underneath the building into the 2-story high crawl space that you see in the picture. And my buddy, Alan, I think that's his name right now, running. They were all running, so I cried out for Alan to come back and help me, because I couldn't move. So he came back and pulled me where I was standing, physically pulled me. He just pulled my arm, physically, and I sort of kind of jumped from the position I was standing. And he was asking, he was saying, take cover, and I was asking, what's going on here? You know, something's happening, and it was happening fast.
I understand that you also heard some screams from those members that were still back on the parade ground, some calling for their mothers. Yes, sir.
That part, it was right after when Sergeant Santini, we saw him coming out from the first building where me and Alan just crossed, and this ball white light from 50 feet where we were laying down, it looked like the size of a melon, a small melon, cantaloupe. But it was a bright white light, and it wasn't a tracer, because I know I've seen tracers before. I fired in my M16s, and I know what tracers look like. But this wasn't no tracer, because it sort of came from the 2nd story, and it sort of roller coastered down to Sergeant Santini's height. And Sergeant Santini's about 5'11", about 5'11", 6 foot. And he was waving up and down his arms, screaming about what's going on, telling us to take cover, and he was cursing the sky because something was coming down. And he started to run. He disappeared from the 2nd building, and this bright light just sort of roller coastered itself down to his height and zipped across, and it disappeared. And the next thing we heard was a slap in the thumb. And one of us, Hackett, crawled over to the other side to see where Sergeant Santini was, and he was out on the pavement. He didn't move. Apparently he was knocked out or something. Something hit him. And when he came back, this is when we started hearing screaming from Alpha Company all the way down to Bravo, then to Charlie Company, and to Delta. When I came to Delta Company, we heard somebody out in the parade formation screaming for Mommy. And it went a kind of high-pitched scream and down to a grunting sort of scream, and I could still hear it when I talk about this. And, I mean, you hear a man screaming like that, you know something's gone wrong. And I told Jones, who was sitting, was lying next to me, I told him we should go out there and help these guys because something's going on out there. He just turned around and said, no, they're already dead, forget about it.
Basically, the book is about a very interesting situation that occurred in September 1st of 1977. And it was at Fort Benning, Georgia, where John was stationed as a recruit. And actually, he was a volunteer. He wasn't really a recruit, but I use the word recruit. And when he first arrived at Fort Benning, he was in formation for the welcoming speech with the captain. And at the same time, there were about 1,300 troops all on this formation. And as they were standing there waiting for the welcoming speech, what occurred was something really dramatic. There were some lights shining and flashing down at one end. They were in formation with Alpha Company first, then Bravo, then Charlie, and then finally Delta. John was in the Delta Division. He looked down, and they were supposed to be facing forward in the attention, but people started running. And he began to watch the lights coming forward over Alpha. People were running, and it was total chaos. It moved up to Bravo, then Charlie, and finally to Delta. Obviously, what was happening was really strange. John began to notice that the people who weren't running seemed to be frozen or asleep in formation. And he looked over at the captain. The captain who was about to give the speech was fast asleep. And the last thing John remembers is that he must have lost consciousness, because the next thing he knows is he was looking at his feet. One of the most amazing events that I've ever heard of. Namely that 1,300 troops were, or possibly 1,300 troops, were abducted on a UFO on this particular day. That's the first chapter of the book. The book goes through about 2 or 3, maybe 4 other major events that occurred during this 2-week period, and finally culminates at the end with an actual combat maneuver between the troops and a UFO. When I first met John and he told me the story, my first question, and I guess I wasn't really listening to him, was what did everybody think about after it happened? Well, in actuality, while this event occurred in 1977, John's recollection of it started in April of 1989 when he began having nightmares. Quite through some synchronicity, I had a chance to speak with a gentleman who was at Fort Benning in September of 1977 and said to me, "I have no knowledge of this event." And I said, "Well, it was in September." And he said, "September?" And he said to me, he said, "You know, I don't remember anything about September." And I said, "Well, that seems normal to me, because after all, how many people can remember a particular month?" But as we talked, he became more and more agitated, until finally we had to stop talking, because he was actually becoming almost on the verge of violence over this idea that he couldn't remember September. We've spoken since, and I don't even mention Fort Benning, and he has no recollection of the fact that we even talked about it. So it's a very strange thing. I think that there are a lot of troops out there who are having all kinds of physical and mental problems, but have not yet had that awakening experience that John had.